WAOB News 10 presents Dialogue, a weekly public affairs program exploring community concerns and spotlighting regional activities.
And good Sunday morning to you, everybody. Welcome to Dialogue. And I have to share that I have so been looking forward to this conversation. It's with the president and CEO of the Southern Poverty Law Center. And of course, some of us who are probably more mature in age are more familiar with the work of SPLC, but some of the younger people may not be so much. And I think this is just a perfect opportunity in terms of what's going on in our country and in our world to re-educate ourselves about the work of SPLC. Well, they have a president and CEO, Margaret Huang, who has only been in this position for how long now, Margaret?
For 12 weeks, Carla.
Wow. Well, first of all, thank you so much for granting this interview. As I said, I've been looking forward to talking with you. Your background, you have been an advocate for human rights and racial justice for 25 plus years, and now you're the president and chief executive officer of the Southern Poverty Law Center. So, you know, when the opportunity came to you, what were your thoughts about taking on this massive responsibility?
Well, thank you, Carla. It's such a pleasure to be with you this morning. When I saw the job description for the president and CEO role, what struck me most was the opportunity to work for an organization that has as its mission the focus on racial justice and on being anti-racist. I've done human rights work and civil rights work for many, many years now. And there is always an issue of race discrimination, of gender discrimination, of identity discrimination in all of my work. But often the organizations where I worked were not explicitly focused on that aspect. And I felt at this particular moment, it was incredibly compelling to be in a place where that would be the stated purpose of the organization, to really tackle structural racism and oppression. And it was what was so exciting to me about coming to the SPLC.
Well, let's talk about, you mentioned the mission and I guess the goals of the organization. You are dedicated to fighting hate and bigotry, to seek justice for the most vulnerable members of our society. So a part of that, and headlines pretty much daily consist of police brutality, racial injustice, poverty. Of course, with our circumstances now with COVID, more people are having to get in line for food distributions to survive. So when you talk about your mission and your goals, how do you carry out that mission and those goals?
Well, when the SPLC started, it actually started as a 3-person law office. And the intention was to do civil rights litigation. Over the years, the SPLC has grown tremendously. We now have more than 350 staff across 5 states. And the work continues to be carried out through litigation. We still bring cases challenging governmental inequities for communities of color and for poor people. We challenge individual actors as well. But we've also added other components of the work. For example, when we were at one point suing the Ku Klux Klan and trying to put them out of business, we realized that we needed more research and documentation about hate groups in the country. And so we created a team of people who actually monitor and investigate hate groups around the country. And then we realized that we had an opportunity to try to stop the phenomenon of hate by encouraging and teaching young people how to actually welcome different perspectives, different views, and to be part of a multicultural society. So we created an educational component of the organization. So today we're doing all of those pieces, the investigation and documentation work, the working with teachers and students to understand our history and to embrace a diverse world and to participate in our democracy. And we've added other areas of work as well, doing policy work at the state legislative level as well as the national level.
We, as you were talking about, people who gather the information about hate groups, we have a map. This is from 2019, and there are at least 940 groups considered hate groups. So how do you track hate groups?
So there's a number of ways of doing it. We actually monitor folks' activity on social media and online. Many of the groups have websites that you can visit. But many of them are also active in pursuing various agendas in their communities. And so they might convene meetings, they might try to represent themselves with local government, they might do press interviews, and these are all things that we're monitoring and tracking to enable us to be able to do that count. I should note that the count has substantially increased over the last 4 years. And that has been, of course, since the election of Donald Trump, which I believe has fostered quite a bit of open declaration of hate, anti-Semitism, anti-government sentiment. And white nationalism is actually one of the biggest growth areas in hate groups. We've seen a very substantial growth over the last year amongst white nationalist groups.
So along with that, I guess you have the data to map out in terms of increases in hate crimes and hate speech and those types of things. Another hot button issue right now, of course, is police brutality. And so would that fall in line with what you do in terms of when you look at the police who are killing or beating or whatever to other groups, other racial groups, people who are brown and black and minorities in general?
Well, there's no question that hate underlies many of those crimes that you've just described. When the police are using both brutal force or lethal force against communities of color, whether claiming to be pursuing criminal activity or whether most recently, whether it's been directed at peaceful protesters, there's no question that hate and structural racism are underlying those actions. That is different, though, Carla, from what we're doing, which is that we're tracking private organizations of hate. And so we're documenting where individuals are acting in the name of their hate, and where they've identified themselves, they have a name, they have an identity and a brand that they're using, and frankly, they're out recruiting folks to join them. One of the things we've noticed is that it is very infrequent that we find direct connections between police forces and hate groups. Most likely because that would probably be the grounds for firing police if they had a known connection to a white supremacist or a hate group. So I don't believe that many police officers are formally members of these hate groups. But absolutely, it is hate and it is structural racism that leads to so much of the terrible behavior of police that we've been seeing over the last several months and for many, many decades.
Can you talk us through the process? Say, for instance, somebody on your staff identifies a hate group in a part of the country. And then, I guess, is there a meeting about it? And then you investigate even more? And then once they're identified, what happens next?
So yes, as you've noted, we have folks who are constantly monitoring and are looking for new hate groups as well as continued activity of existing hate groups. And we keep a regular monitor on all of those groups and on new groups as well. We do a documentation. We have criteria that we use to determine whether a group has enough standing that they should be included in the list. Sometimes it could just be an individual, in which case we don't identify individuals in our hate list. We're talking about folks who are gathering together to do this terrible work. And so we do monitor, and then once we've designated, there's a couple of things we do. One is we do keep track of them. We're able to monitor their activities. At times we have offered information to local law enforcement about the activities of the hate groups in their area. We also have done quite a bit of advocacy, both at the state level and particularly where our states are in the southeast part of the United States, but also at the federal level. We've given testimony a number of times to Congress about the growth of hate groups, the activities, and what Congress must do in order to prevent these groups from increasing their numbers and their reach across the country.
We need to take a break, but when we come back, I'm just curious in terms of the research over the last several years, if you've been able to also break down the ages of participants in those hate groups. So I will talk more with Margaret Huang, President and Chief Executive Officer of the Southern Poverty Law Center, when we come back. Stay with us, everybody. And welcome back, everybody, on this Sunday morning. I am still having a dialogue, a very intense, serious, timely dialogue with Margaret Huang, who is the President and Chief Executive Officer of the Southern Poverty Law Center. And before we continue talking about, what you do with your organization, I do have to make note of this. This is possible, of course, because you said yes, but I had been in contact with the interim CEO and president, who was Karen Baines Dunning, also the former First Lady of Albany State University, right here in Albany, Georgia. And when she and her husband left Albany, and then we got the press release that she was named the interim president and CEO, and then we heard that someone else had been named, and that someone else is Margaret Huang. Of course, I had been aggravating her, and I say that because, I really wanted to have this discussion. So a shout out to her, and thank you again for saying yes. But I wanted to link that for people here in Albany and Southwest Georgia, that she has actually served, as the interim president and chief executive officer for SPLC. Before coming to SPLC, you were also formerly the chief executive at Amnesty International USA. And for people who are not, we've heard of it, what is the work of Amnesty?
Well, first I have to say my own huge props to Karen. Karen was pivotal in encouraging me to come to the SPLC, and I feel very humbled to follow in her footsteps. She is an extraordinary leader, and I feel very blessed to have known her. My work at Amnesty International was focused on promoting and protecting human rights around the world, and particularly here in the United States. Amnesty did quite a lot of work on calling out the inappropriate and illegal use of force by police in response to so many of the killings that we've seen over the last several years. We also have a big campaign to combat gun violence as a human rights crisis in the United States. And there's also a campaign to try to protect refugee and asylum seekers' rights, who are desperately being served by this current administration, which is turning away people who are seeking help and seeking a safe refuge from terrible situations back home. So those were all some of the areas of work at Amnesty. It absolutely was a great stepping point for the work that we're doing at the Southern Poverty Law Center. We also do quite a bit of work at Southern Poverty Law Center on immigrant rights. We have a number of cases we're pursuing challenging the administration's asylum policy and the ban on asylum seekers here. We also represent individual immigrant detainees who are being held in private detention facilities across the South in particular, but across the country. And so this is work that I am fortunate enough to get to continue here at the Southern Poverty Law Center.
One of the things that I'm curious about, you noted that you have the data that shows the increase in hate crimes and the hate crimes organizations since the presidency of our current president. I'm curious, if you go back to the previous administration, did you begin to see, and based on the data, did you begin to see hate crime groups and hate crimes organizations increase under the Obama administration?
Actually, yes, there was an increase, and many at the time attributed it to the folks who opposed Obama winning the presidency, and the response to his election was to encourage a lot of those hate groups to become more active. I have to say, though, that they've been far more openly engaged and recruiting in the last 4 years. And one of the things, as I noted earlier, the growth in the groups who are declaring white nationalism. White nationalism is the category of groups that organized the march in Charlottesville in 2017, the Unite the Right March. And we've seen a very substantial growth amongst those people with that ideology in the last year.
I'm also curious about the ages of those participating. Are you seeing younger, or how do they break down age-wise?
So we are seeing people of all ages. I mean, to your question, there's no age restriction on who can embrace hate. But one of the things that's perhaps the most alarming is that hate groups are targeting younger people and are trying to recruit amongst younger people. In fact, just this week, we released a new guide called Building Resilience and Confronting Risk in the COVID-19 Era. This guide is intended to help parents and caregivers who are recognizing that their children are at home, are spending much more time on social media and online, and they're not getting supervision during this time because parents are struggling to work from home, struggling to care for their families and to make sure that they're keeping their families safe. And so with that increase in the number of young people spending time online, not being supervised, not having other activities to distract them, we have a lot of concerns about efforts that are clearly on the rise to recruit young people to join these hate groups. And our guide offers suggestions for how parents and caregivers can actually keep their eyes open and their ears attentive so that they can catch any warning signs that their children might be getting radicalized by these extremist groups.
And as we talk about a young person, I cannot, none of us can forget the Charleston shootings at Mother Emanuel AME Church, when we had a young man, Dylan Roof, just 5 years ago, acting alone. And I can't remember his age, but definitely in his own videos, where he would be target practicing, he had the Confederate flag flying, and his actions spoke hate, and he carried out that hate at Mother Emanuel.
Yes, that perpetrator was somebody who was radicalized online. He had started following extremist groups. He had embraced ideology that he learned about from online platforms, and he was connected to actually a global network of folks who embrace hate ideology. There's no question that the damage that's being done, the radicalization that's happening of young people is a serious concern. And it's something that law enforcement agencies have been paying much more attention to. I think that those terrible killings in Charleston were something that was very much sparked by what that perpetrator was learning online. And it's one of the reasons why we do track the activities of hate groups, what they're putting out there in terms of resources, the way that they were trying to recruit new adherents to their ideologies. These are all really important so that law enforcement, but also others in the community can monitor and help to stop people from embracing those kinds of ideas and beliefs.
Well, we need to take another break, but when we come back, you mentioned it briefly. I'm just curious as to how COVID has affected your work and your staff. So we'll talk about that on the other side. Stay with us, everybody. And welcome back on this Sunday morning. Before I forget, I would like to share the Southern Poverty Law Center's web addresses. We've got SPLcenter.org and then SPLcenter.org/hate -map or hate watch, and that is a blog. So if you're interested in keeping up with the surveillance or the watching of hate groups, the observation of hate groups across the country, you can head to those websites. I'm still talking with Margaret Huang, who is President and Chief Executive Officer of the Southern Poverty Law Center. You mentioned COVID. How has COVID impacted your work?
Well, like for so many Americans, it's turned the world upside down, Carla. Our staff has been sent home. We're working remotely across our states, across the Southeast. We have been continuing to work on cases. Some of the lawyers have actually appeared virtually in front of judges to argue their cases. We're still producing curriculum and resources for teachers, including now new resources that are intended to help teachers who are worrying about their students, the children in their classes, and they're not actually in physical classes with them anymore. But all of this just lifts up the fact that the world has shifted, and how we do our work moving forward will be very different than what it's been in the past, simply because we have to take this into account. One of the biggest things, Carla, that we've noted, and you referenced it at the beginning, is that COVID has laid bare a lot of the issues that the SPLC has been working on for decades. The racial disparities in terms of access to medical care, in terms of healthcare outcomes, in terms of who's suffering the most with the layoffs, the unemployment numbers that have grown, whether children are getting equal opportunities to education at this moment. All of these are things that the SPLC has worked on for a long time. And they've been known, but they haven't been openly discussed in the ways that we're seeing now with the COVID pandemic. And I think that's a very positive thing, that we're openly debating and discussing how we shift the larger structural racism that has been holding down so many communities in our states.
I would like to give your web address once again, SPLcenter.org, SPLcenter.org/hate-map, or you can just put in hate watch to follow the blog. Thank you so much, Margaret Huang, President and Chief Executive Officer of the Southern Poverty Law Center, for providing us an education on this Sunday morning. Best wishes.
Thanks so much, Carla. It was a pleasure.
And have a wonderful Sunday, everybody.